still resonate today. I am a woman's rights. I have as much muscle as any man and can do as much work as any man. I have plowed and reaped and husked and chopped and mowed, and can any man do any more than that? I have heard much about the sexes being equal. I can carry as much as any man and can eat as much too, if I can get it. I am as strong as any man is now. That's Sojourner Truth. Susan B. Anthony was a social reformer who focused on women's suffrage, equal rights for all women, and was a staunch abolitionist. After her arrest for casting an illegal vote in Rochester in the 1872 presidential election, she said, "It was we, the people, not we, the white male citizens, nor yet we, the male citizens, but we, the whole people who formed the Union." She worked tirelessly, advocating for women's rights to vote and for equality during a time when many were determined to silence her. However, she was unrelenting in her quest for equality. Even at the very end of her life, during her last formal speech on suffrage in Washington, D.C., before her death in 1906, she famously remarked in her concluding line, "Failure is impossible." Her passion and fervor for her work was instrumental in securing the 19th Amendment of the Constitution, giving women the right to vote. The amendment, known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, honored her work on behalf of women's rights. Finally, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was one of the first leaders of the women's rights movement and was known for her powerful and persuasive writing. At the Waterloo Quaker Meeting House in 1844, she said, "Women alone can understand the height and the depth, the length and the breadth of her own degradation and woe. Man cannot speak for us." She helped organize the 1948 Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls and drafted the Declaration of Sentiments, a document that noted the ways in which women were discriminated against. She believed that women were entitled to the same rights and privileges as men, and she inspired many women to stand up for their rights. So these three women represented the Women's Rights Pioneers Monument model. They were true trailblazers who fought for causes they believed in: women's rights, gender equality, and racial equality. Their significant triumphs led to a better society and created a legacy that will endure throughout time. Their conviction, determination, and perseverance has paved the way for generations of women, and the groundwork they laid into the women's rights movement that is more and more diverse and intersectional today. We can all see evidence of that. Although history can be complex, I do encourage each and every one of you to do your own research on all three of these women. With that said, as we celebrate Women's History Month, we honor their memory and acknowledge their sacrifices through the donation of this monument today. It serves as a powerful reminder of the progress we have made and the work we have left to do for the rights and freedoms of all people, regardless of gender, race, or any other factor. This incredible new monument will serve as a lasting symbol of three extraordinary women who, despite all the odds and against many opposing forces, stayed true to their maverick spirit and would not stay quiet, sit still, or follow the rules. For that, I am personally grateful. In fact, I think we all should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Deputy Commissioner Cates Williams, and we are going to keep that energy going. And I would like to welcome Emily Kadar, the Director of Women's Affairs for the Office of Governor Kathy Hochul.
Thank you. And yeah, just trying to follow the executive deputy commissioner is very challenging, so I'm not even going to try. That's really such moving words, and thank you for bringing all three of these powerful women into this space with their own words today. On behalf of the governor, who you just heard from, as you know, she is very passionate about women's rights and also the very proud of the fact that here in New York, we really are the birthplace of this movement, and it's a legacy that we all carry. And so I just wanted to very briefly, again, reiterate her greetings and congratulations to the entire leadership team at the New York State Museum. Thank you so much to Monumental Women, Pam, and the entire board, and all of the members. Congratulations, and thank you also to Meredith, who also the governor got to spend some time with on Monday for another project that we're doing. So she's totally in the mix. We're just going to keep pulling her in for all sorts of things. But just very briefly, I wanted to say. So this, as you all know, it's Women's History Month. It's International Women's Day today. The theme, every year for Women's History Month, there's a theme. And the theme this year, the national theme, is celebrating women who tell our stories. And I think it's very appropriate that that is our theme this month and while we are here, because among those women are the leaders of Monumental Women, and the artist who's here with us today, because one of the many ways that we tell stories in public life is by who we choose to honor with our public works and with our public art. And when you walk around any city in New York, you see a lot of men on horseback, and you see a lot of monuments to folks who I'm sure were very accomplished, but you do not tend to see a lot of people that look like most of the folks in the room here today. And it really is so significant that you all have fought for so long to change that narrative and to bring women into the forefront of the stories that we tell in our public spaces. And I'm so proud and excited that the New York State Museum has this beautiful donated work of art, and so that story can continue to be told here. I also have with me a proclamation from the governor for Women's History Month. It's very long. I promise I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will just say very briefly. Whereas since 1987, the month of March has been nationally designated as Women's History Month, and New York State joins in celebrating and recognizing extraordinary women of all backgrounds who have made immeasurable contributions to our state and nation through their achievements, success, and leadership in all areas of endeavor. And whereas this occasion provides an opportunity to learn more about the meaningful work and accomplishments of women who have provided a voice for generations, we celebrate women across all walks of life and all professions and organizations and groups, making a difference in every single field and earning a seat at the table after being excluded for far too long. Now, therefore, I, Kathy Hochul, Governor of the State of New York, do hereby proclaim March 2023 Women's History Month. Thank you, and I'm going to give this to Pam to hold on to. Thank you, and congratulations to everyone.
Great. Thank you, Emily. So before I begin, I would like to recognize the Monumental board members that are here today. And they made the trip upstate by cars, by trains. Pam Elam, Brenda Berkman, Ariel Deutsch, Colleen Jenkins, Eileen McDonald, Heather Nestle, and Regina Wilson. Thank you all for being here today. So one of the things that I admire about the suffragists is the fact that they use power of history to accomplish their goals. Elizabeth Cady Stanton used the Declaration of Independence to demand rights for women in her Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions in Seneca Falls in 1848. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that men and women are created equal. Alice Paul, leader of the National Women's Party, realized that suffrage alone would not guarantee equality between the sexes. On July 21st, 1923, Paul presented the Equal Rights Amendment to a group of women gathered in Seneca Falls to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Seneca Falls Convention. We're coming up on our 100th anniversary of that this July, by the way. The Monumental Women unveiled the Women's Rights Pioneers Monument in Central Park on August 26, 2020, the centennial anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. So it is fitting that today, March 8th, International Women's Day, is the day that Monumental Women is formally donating the Women's Rights Pioneer Monument model to the New York State Museum. Today is the day we globally honor women's achievements, raise awareness about discrimination, and take action to drive gender parity. The hard work and success that Monumental Women achieved in placing the first statue of real women in Central Park and the fundraising campaign to commission the 1/3 size model for inclusion in the State Museum's collections exemplifies International Women's Day's objectives perfectly. I am honored to present our next speaker, Pam Elam, President of Monumental Women. Pam Elam worked in various capacities in New York City government and its elected officials from 1980 to 2008. She has extensive experience in policy, legislative, administration, and management operations. Pam made her first public speech in support of women's rights when she was 13 years old and has been organizing for women ever since. She has organized and managed countless programs, conferences, hearings, and projects over the years, including the first ever presidential candidate debate on women's issues in New York City in 1988, and over 100 public hearings on women's issues for the New York City Council between 1980 and 1989. Additionally, Pam is a curator's dream. She is a trained historian, and her donations to the State Museum related to women's history over the past few years are deeply documented and so well organized that when we get them, our curators really have nothing left to do except put a number on it and put it into storage. So thank you for that. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Pam Elam, President of Monumental Women.
First, I want to say what a pleasure it is to work with Jennifer and Ashley. It's wonderful not only to find kindred spirits in life, but in a museum as well. So thank you for your work for women's history, and I look forward to donating even more material if you'll accept it. My closets are overflowing, so you'll let me know. It's not often that you have the chance to be part of something truly historic. Monumental Women is proud that our all-volunteer, not-for-profit group has broken the bronze ceiling in New York City Central Park. It took 7 years. We raised over $1.5 million in private funding. We fought through many obstacles. But as you've heard, on August 26, 2020, the centennial anniversary of the ratification and certification of the 19th Votes for Women Amendment to the Constitution, our Women's Rights Pioneers Monument honoring Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton was unveiled as the first statue of real women in Central Park's 167-year history. The 42 million people who visit Central Park each year already see statues of Alice in Wonderland, Mother Goose, and Juliet with Romeo, as well as statues of nymphs and angels. Now Central Park visitors can see some real monumental women. And I'm especially pleased to report that the Women's Rights Pioneers Monument on Literary Walk has already become an important must-see location. Thousands of people have already accessed our app, Talking Statues, to hear the words of Truth, Anthony, and Stanton while they view the images of those incredible women. But creating the Women's Rights Pioneers Monument is only one of the goals of Monumental Women. In addition, we seek to increase the awareness and appreciation of women's history through our education campaign, as well as our challenge to municipalities all across the nation and the world. We urge cities to reimagine their public spaces, to include tributes to the diverse women who helped create and inspire them. Little did we know that over those past 7 years, we would have to constantly challenge our own municipality as well. It's not easy to donate a work of art to the city of New York. It was not easy to take the long, bureaucratic roller coaster ride which traveled through the Parks Department, the Central Park Conservancy, the Public Design Commission, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and every single community board surrounding Central Park. But step by step, meeting by meeting, we crossed the minefield, which is New York City government, and won all necessary approvals. In New York City's public spaces in 2020, there were 150 statues, and only 5 of them were women. Thanks to Monumental Women, there are 6. I want to give you several quick examples of the bureaucratic roadblocks Monumental Women faced from just one agency, the New York City Parks Department. At our first meeting, they said, no, there will never be another new statue in Central Park. It's a historical collection and nothing else can be added. We persisted. Next, they said, why don't you pick another park? Or are you sure you want a statue? How about a nice garden? We persisted. Then, thanks to the new Parks Commissioner, Mitchell Silver, they said, okay, you can be an exception to our unwritten moratorium as long as your statue is outside the wall of Central Park, on the sidewalk, or as they put it, within the park's footprint. We persisted. We fought and won a beautiful site on Literary Walk in the Central Park Mall. And finally, they said something that advocates of past Central Park statues had never heard. They told us we should find evidence of Truth, Anthony, and Stanton actually being in Central Park. Let me pause a moment. I found that evidence. And in case anyone ever asks you, Susan B. Anthony loved to take long walks through Central Park. Elizabeth Cady Stanton in her younger years played with her children there, and in her later years took carriage rides through Central Park. And when Sojourner Truth lived in New York City, Central Park had never been built. So I hope the Parks Department appreciated that history lesson, and we move forward. Because learning from a history which fully and fairly includes the vast and various contributions of women and people of color offers a departure point in our search for social change. We rethink the past in order to reshape the future. As we all know, through the gift of women's history, we discover an historical treasure chest overflowing with the stories of women who serve to inspire and energize us. We learn of their strategies and tactics in the battle for equality. We learn of their courage and their imperfections. We look at the totality of their lives. We build on their work. We honor their memories. We vow to complete their journeys. We begin to move history forward. Because we know that a knowledge of women's history helps us understand the context of the struggle for equality, as well as the continuum of the fight for justice. That knowledge makes us better advocates and activists. That's the power of women's history. We must use that power to continue to fight for full equality for women in our lifetimes. We owe it to those who came before us and ourselves to move history forward. One statue in one park can light a fuse that sparks the imagination and ambition of a child who sees herself in that statue. That one statue can start a chain reaction, leading to an explosion of knowledge and possibilities. Monumental Women was proud to light that fuse on August 26th in Central Park. In whatever ways we can honor the valiant women who came before us and bring their stories to light, let's do it. It doesn't have to be a statue or a historic house, although that would be great. How about a street sign? It could even be a garden. I like gardens. Let's have some more dedicated to women. And how about a plaque on a site where she made history, or any number of other possible tributes to her courage and her spirit? Who knows how many people will walk by that tribute and be inspired by that woman? Who knows how many little girls and little boys will gain a new role model? Who knows how many of us will see that tribute and feel a surge of energy and activism? And we invite you to join us. Just go to monumentalwomen.org or our social media to see our various projects. We welcome your help. It's only fitting that our first monument of truth, Anthony and Stanton, depicts 3 New York women who dedicated their lives to fighting for equal rights. They were contemporaries. They often attended the same meetings and spoke on the same stages. It's only right that they share the same pedestal, because our monument conveys the power of women working together to bring about revolutionary change in our society. These extraordinary women challenge us to continue the fight. At Monumental Women, we're proud that our Women's Rights Pioneers Monument makes a lasting statement to all future visitors of Central Park, a message written in stone and shaped in bronze, that equality applies to everyone and history includes all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam. Our next speaker is Ashley Hopkins Benton, Senior Historian and Curator of our Social History Collections.
Apologies, missing clicker. In 2014, when we began in earnest to dig into our collections for the 2017 Centennial of Women's Suffrage in New York State, we found the Women's History Collection here at the New York State Museum was rather lacking. In a way, this was actually lucky. It led us to reach out to institutions and individuals across the state, and in doing so, we first met and worked with so many amazing women, Pam Elam and Colleen Jenkins included. But it also presented us with a huge challenge. How can we better represent women's stories throughout New York State history? Part of this process involved digging into our current collections and discovering hidden gems that have told women's stories all along, but many were not cataloged the way that would help us find them as women's history stories. This challenge was perfectly illustrated in the discovery in our collection of a plaster bas-relief by sculptor Lila Usher, who is known for her work with the suffragists. The bas-relief was cataloged as Old Woman with a Bun. On closer inspection, it turned out it was Susan B. Anthony. The second part of growing our women's history collection comes in the form of making connections with women in our community and looking for both everyday stories and artifacts that communicate the history of changemakers like Truth, Stanton, and Anthony. Through these connections, we have worked to grow the collection through both donations and purchases, and I'd like to share with you some of the highlights of our recent acquisitions. A sewing machine, once used by Chinese immigrant women in a sweatshop, was donated by the family of Su Ping Chu, an immigrant woman from Hong Kong. Chu used the sewing machine as a hobby and as a way to connect with her new city as well as her children. And she would later go on to be a social worker in New York City as well. A poster made by then teenager Alethea Mouzakis for the 2016 Women's March documents a way in which a young woman worked for change even though she could not yet vote, not unlike the story of the suffragists. A collection of photographs by Diana Mara Henry documents the 1977 New York State Women's Meeting and the political work of New York women like Bella Abzug and Liz Holzman. And I invite you after the program and reception today to go right across the hall and to check out the photography exhibit there where some of Henry's photographs are included. And finally, a dress worn by then Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul to celebrate the achievements of pioneering women that came before her. And now she is, of course, the first woman elected governor in New York State. In June of 2021, the New York State Museum was pleased to accept a gift from Monumental Women of some of the molds used to cast the Women's Rights Pioneer Monument in Central Park for our collection. And you can see two examples here today. We were excited to have these tangible artifacts to tell the story of the tremendous and groundbreaking work that went into placing the first statue of real women in Central Park, an important piece of New York women's history in its own right. I especially love the details that are visible in the molds, the visual ties that sculptor Meredith Bergman made to the history of the suffrage movement. In the pieces here today, you can see a depiction of Susan B. Anthony's red shawl, which she wore to speaking engagements, and of Elizabeth Cady Stanton's torso, complete with sunflower, a reference to the pen name that she used for early women's rights articles in the Lily. We are grateful to have the molds and now the 1/3 scale model of the Women's Rights Pioneer Monument to share these stories of two generations of women pioneers, that of Truth, Stanton, and Anthony, and their relentless work for women's rights, and that of Monumental Women and their tireless work to share and commemorate women's history. With our student visitors in particular, we will be able to use the monument to share the concepts of social justice, civic engagement, government process, fundraising, and art as a medium for history telling. We hope that students in turn will be encouraged to address inequalities that they see in their own lives after learning about these examples of historic and contemporary women taking action to eliminate discrimination and work toward a more equal society. Now I am pleased to introduce Meredith Bergman, sculptor of the Women's Rights Pioneer Monument. For over 40 years, Meredith Bergman has been making sculpture that deals with complex themes in an accessible, beautiful, and provocative way. Working within the tradition of narrative sculpture, she draws on her love of the history of art, literature, and mythology to make the past speak to the present. Examples of Bergman's other works include the Boston Women's Memorial, which features Abigail Adams, Phyllis Wheatley, and Lucy Stone, and is located in Boston, Massachusetts. The FDR Hope Memorial on Roosevelt Island in New York City. A sculpture of Marian Anderson on the campus of Converse College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the collections of the Ginsburg family and Columbia University. Welcome, Meredith.
Hello, and thank you. I'm honored to be here today, and I want to thank all the people in the audience who I know who came to see this. And I would like especially to thank Monumental Women for choosing me, giving me the honor and the opportunity to commemorate and hopefully bring to life these wonderful women about whom you've already heard so much. So I'm just going to talk about sculpture. This is the Central Park Mall. Evidently, 42 million people come every year to the park, and most of them walk along this, which is the only straight pathway in the park. It was designed to be lined with statues. And the two that you see at the very edges are donations from Scotland, Robbie Burns and Sir Walter Scott. So this became Literary Walk. There's a statue of Shakespeare at the beginning of it. And you'll see on the right, there is another poet who is not so much read today, Fitzgreen Halleck. This was the first statue installed there. And across from him, an empty space. And this was the wonderful site that Monumental Women succeeded in getting for this monument. When faced with portraying famous people from history, it's great to have photographs, but there's still many, many decisions a sculptor has to make. For instance, what age are they? What moment in history are you portraying? And I always try not to be literal, to try to show the young woman and the old woman a variety of facial expressions that might be possible in the portrait. It's not a photograph, it's an interpretation. So here is Elizabeth Cady Stanton with two of her children. She had 7 children and was busy for many, many years. She was the radical philosopher, but she really could only stay home and write. And that's part of why her friendship with Susan B. Anthony, here young, as very few people have seen her, became such an important part of both their lives, because Anthony, who never married, was free to travel and be an activist. She did have suitors, but she chose not to marry and really became the icon of this women's rights movement. And Sojourner Truth, and there's actually a copy of this large downstairs in the concourse. Sojourner Truth was enslaved. She walked away from slavery before she would have been freed by New York state law. And she supported herself. It says, I sell the shadow to support the substance. She supported herself in her speaking career by selling these cards, which people would collect and put in albums. And they were referred to as shadows, photographs. But in doing so, and in copywriting her own image, one of the first people to do so, she took ownership of herself in yet another, even more profound way. So she was really self-made and self-owned in a way that perhaps only someone who had been enslaved would understand. Notice that she has her knitting, which became an important part of her interpretation. So here is this model in clay in my studio. A monument is made many times. It's made little, like 1 inch equals 1 foot, to go through approvals process, because at that size it's easy to alter, it's easy to discuss and carry to meetings. For the enlargement, I never go from something this big to something huge, because there's so many errors that can creep in. So this is 1/3 the final height. Susan B. Anthony is 36 inches. In the park, she's 9 feet tall. And then this was digitally enlarged in foam with a layer of clay over it, and it comes apart so that hands, which of course have shapes inside as well as outside, can be worked on, and heads can be brought down and set on a table for working on the portrait. I did not work on this alone. I want to give a shout out to my marvelous assistant, a wonderful sculptor, Patrick Piggott. Stand up for a sec. And his family who are here. He's local. He's done a statue for Troy and is working on a monumental history idea for Troy as well. This is right at the end. We're putting the final details, and the 3 statues are 3 separate dollies, but they're pushed together to show the composition. This is what happens next. The heads and hands are gone. They went to a workshop. This mold, this pink rubber, is painted on as a liquid. It cures, and then it needs a rigid shell to keep its shape. If you laid the pink rubber on the floor, it would just go flat. You wouldn't have a true mold. So this is what happens. A team of artisans come and make these molds and wreck the studio while they're doing it. Then the molds are taken to the foundry. So people who ask me, how are you going to get this out of here, are missing this stage. I don't. I keep the clay originals. I take them apart. But the molds go to the foundry and are reassembled. This is the upper part of I think that's the torso of Susan B. Anthony. And this man is painting hot wax inside to close the seam of a wax statue that is in there. And the wax is the thickness of the finished bronze, because the lost wax process requires that wherever there's wax will be bronze. So these are the heads and the wonderful alligator handbag. Susan Anthony's handbag was so famous, there was a children's jump rope rhyme about it. And she carried all her papers, which we turned into a flyer for a lecture by Sojourner Truth, a petition to the New York State Legislature, and an announcement of a women's rights meeting at Cooper Union in her bag. I'm trying to demonstrate where the head will be. This is the committee. You can see Brenda Berkman and Pam and members of the Parks Department. Here's the back of Colleen. Okay, then it is cast in bronze in sections. So here's poor Sojourner Truth, tack welded together. Her head and hand are on the table. And I go to the foundry and make sure that all the parts fit together. And that's what's happening here. Anthony's hand is supposed to rest on Stanton's shoulder in a gesture that I hope will be ambiguous enough that viewers can decide, is she warning her, is she comforting her, whatever you would like. But it needs to touch, and bronze shrinks as it is cast, so getting that hand on that shoulder required hammering the arm and a whole bunch of other tricks that foundries have in the middle of the pandemic in August in 100-degree heat. And then, in 104-degree heat, Sarah May is using a torch to heat the metal and painting on chemicals, which colors the metal to hide all that welding and all that correction that happens in the bronze process. And this is the last day at the foundry. Stanton already has her coat of shiny wax. The patina genius is with a torch and is working on Sojourner Truth's skirt. And these gentlemen on the left are sliding a piece of metal on the underside of Sojourner Truth's chair, which I didn't realize till the last minute was still open, which meant a Central Park raccoon could have climbed up inside the statue. So that was tack welded at things you don't see when it's down on the ground, and of course, when it was 5 feet up in the air on the pedestal, you would have seen that. And here are 7,000 pounds of bronze being lowered onto their pedestal at dawn. And this was the unveiling ceremony. We couldn't have a ceremony like Fitzgreen Halleck had with 10,000 people and the President of the United States. Because of COVID, we had a press conference with 75 people. But it was a magnificent occasion. I have to thank Brenda Berkman for all her work on that day in particular. And Hillary Clinton gave a marvelous speech. That's me when I still had brown hair, and Pam Elam. And we were very, very happy and very relieved that day. And here it is, people left sunflowers, appropriately enough, and the grass had grown back, and there it is. So I'm going to show you a few. Thank you. It was a monumental effort. Probably 25 people at the Bronze Foundry worked on it for 6 months, and many, many others. A few details. Sojourner Truth, the statue's not broken. She did lose part of her index finger sometime during her enslavement in some kind of agricultural accident. We don't know. But she's wearing a brocade jacket, and in the brocade I put images of victory wreaths and a beautiful shawl, and very much dressed as a middle-class lady. Her knitting is on her lap. I used my husband's grandmother's wooden knitting needles as prototypes for those. I did actually have to look up how to knit and purl again, because my Girl Scout training had worn off. I had a merit badge in knitting. Knitting was an important patriotic duty. It was not merely a hobby. It was something that marked you as a real lady and in a sense, a citizen. Susan B. Anthony has her trademark shawl around her, and she is wearing a brooch sculpted by Patrick of Minerva, the Roman goddess of strategy and wisdom. And Sojourner Truth is speaking. Anthony is organizing. She has her traveling satchel full of documents, and Stanton is writing or about to write. Here's the satchel. almost a character of its own in this sculpture. And Stanton has her pen raised, her ink bottle is on the table, a table based on Colleen's great-great-grandmother's writing table. The pedestal is the same Victorian texture. We also put a kind of abstracted sunflower pattern on her dress. Declaration of Sentiments, and 3 volumes, Margaret Fuller, Sarah Grimke, and Mary Wollstonecraft, 4 mothers of the women's rights movement, under her chair. But Stanton's father was a judge, and when Stanton was a child, she once burst into her father's office, and he was trying to deal with a widow who had lost all her property to her husband's brother, as the law allowed. And Stanton was infuriated and said to her father, "Can't something be done?" And he said, "No, I'm sorry, this is what the law says." And she said, "I'll take my scissors and cut these laws out of the books." And she would go on, of course, to change laws in the New York State Legislature. So she gets three books. I just love the way the root flare on these historic elm trees is kind of echoed in the skirt and the books. But this gives you a sense of the size of it. It really is huge when you see it. It went to work immediately. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed, this became a spontaneous memorial for her. And then during the presidential election, it became another spontaneous memorial. This one didn't last as long. This one's taken down pretty fast, but it says, "Grab your future by the ballots." So back to the model. It's a delight and an honor for me, again, to see this here, part of this collection, and I hope that it will inspire people also to visit New York City and see that monument. And I want to again thank Monumental Women and the board members who are here in particular for all their work, not only to create and install this monument in such a prominent location, but for all their other work to bring women's history and women's future to national attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meredith. So before we conclude the program, I would just like to thank the museum's education department for building the mount. They were able to inscribe it exactly the way it is in Central Park, and there's an inscription on the back as well. And to let you know that the monument will be on display across the hall on the other side of the building starting tomorrow. I would also like to thank the museum's public program department, who have been running around, and the AV department, who have been running around all week to get everything ready for today. Thank you so much for all of your hard work. And the history department as well. So I would just like to let you know that if you have not taken a tote bag yet, please take one. Monumental Women are selling merchandise outside. All of the proceeds to the merchandise will go back into Monumental Women. And we have a small reception right outside these doors. Please stay, come get your picture taken with the model and the mold, now that we know more about it. And I would like to thank you all for being here. It's been a great program, so thank you, Sharon. Thank you.